January 6, 2021. On this day, a mob gathered outside and within the walls of the U.S. Capitol building. Protesters assembled in an effort to stop Congress from convening to count the electoral votes that would confirm President Joe Biden's 2020 presidential election victory. Various costumes and tools were represented at these riots, including images from our history, snippets of the ancient Greek and Roman world that we as America so closely resemble. Classical images included allusions to Roman general Julius Caesar, Greek soldier helmets, and a flag with the Greek phrase molon labe, which translates to come and take the weapons. The borrowed images during the Capitol riots demonstrate how historically ancient Greece and Rome were based upon the idolization of war, leading to many civil wars and wars conducted in displays of power. However, images such as those at the Capitol riots distort the historical record, as rioters were using ill-understood slogans from the classical world. If we as an educational community surrender the classics to those who weaponize it, we lose the true historical record. We surrender the field if we don't change the way that we teach and learn from the classics, leaving the ancient world unguarded to exploitation. Take January 6 during the Capitol riots. The Caesarian rhetoric, the cry of defiance molon labe, and the soldier costumes. The famous phrase, crossing the Rubicon, references Julius Caesar's decision to cross the Rubicon River, with this action leading to his forceful seizure of Rome and starting a civil war. The civil war would end with Julius Caesar becoming dictator. At the January 6 Capitol riots, protesters displayed this rhetoric, crossing the Rubicon, urging President Trump to cross the Rubicon, bringing Julius Caesar's use of force to advance his political career into a modern reference that focuses only on dangerous ambition, rather than historical context and consequences. Spartan helmets are sometimes used to take us back to the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC, using the movie 300, referencing the moment when the Spartans delayed the Persians to buy Greek forces time. The movie shows the Spartans portrayed by fair-skinned actors, versus the Persians who were portrayed by people of color. The Battle of Thermopylae, referenced in this use, shifts from an impressive and honorable display of courage and valor into a battle of the races. At the Capitol riots, protesters dressed in Spartan helmets, some decorating their helmets with various messages. The phrase molon labe also historically references the Battle of Thermopylae, conveying the defiant tone of when Spartan king Leonidas challenged and dismissed Xerxes' demand for the Spartans to surrender their weapons. It has been used in the modern day to convey the same challenge and dismissal of King Leonidas, but in reference to gun rights. In this image, the right black flag displays the phrase molon labe. This picture is from the 2018 Minnesota Capitol protest. A similar flag was flown at the U.S. Capitol riot, as seen on the Washington Post livestream, and is often seen at protests. American history is an extension of ancient Greece and Rome, and people continually use these ancient examples of history in times of violence and defiance, staking a claim to the classics. The question is, why? Classics is an inherently flawed field. These pieces of history are to an extent accurately representing the classical world. Ancient Rome and Greece cultivated societies built upon slavery, the idolization of patriarchal values, and the power-hungry virtues that led to perpetual colonization and the need to continually expand and conquer. The Greco-Roman world leaves behind a legacy with the fundamental ideas of an honorable and timeless society, but one specifically of whiteness. Pharos is a webpage dedicated to documenting and educating about examples of appropriation of the Greco-Roman world, and they describe the relationship between an identity and the classical world, specifically a white identity. White supremacist appropriations of Greco-Roman antiquity depend on many errors and distortions of the historical record. Yet, these core beliefs correspond to many of the unexamined beliefs about the ancient world that many people, including classical scholars, already hold. Exploitation of ancient history is not only a problem outside of the field, as seen in the Capitol riots, but also within the field. This problem occurs because we put classics on a pedestal and treat the ancient world as having perfect, great, and idealistic societies. It's been sitting on that pedestal for decades, and it sits untouched. In creating such stagnancy, we diminish the value of the field by only reinforcing the problematic nature of classical history. And if we leave behind the field and stop teaching classics, we lose understanding of both America's history and ideals and the origins of such problematic beliefs within current society. We need to strive to change how we view the field. The value of classics is in the dynamic and timeless nature of the field. Classics is a lens from the past that lets us better understand the history we carry with us today in the present. There are universal human issues within the ancient world that we still grapple with today, and the subject sheds light on the history of our own country. For example, President Coolidge was an avid Latin and Greek scholar who regularly employed classical techniques within his political career. In his autobiography, he attributed his understanding of history in the past and the present to his classical education, saying, "Something in the sequence of history was revealed to me so that I began to understand the significance of our own times and our own country." Our understanding of how classical civilization unites us is fundamental to understanding the values of our shared American identity. The Founding Fathers based their thinking off of Demosthenes and Cicero. Classics can be used to bridge divides and create common ground not only within our American communities, but across nations, as a classical education is core to many systems. So, let's not cancel classics, but we can't keep it how it is. Let's expand classics to be more accessible, invite more voices into the conversation, and modernize our understanding of America's classics. My first encounter with the changing identity of classics was in my Latin 4 class sophomore year, when I wrote an essay on Virgil's Aeneid, a poem that justifies colonization through the main character Aeneas' destiny to found Latium. I remember asking for a copy of Homer's Odyssey because I wanted to examine Homer's writing about a male epic hero who's been idolized and remembered throughout literature. I was using the Aeneid to further examine the female queen Dido, who is central to Aeneas' journey, and how Virgil incorporates certain virtues within his description of Dido, in order to invoke heroic images within her character arc, but also sexism around the capabilities of a female character to govern and lead. An older classmate loaned me her copy of Professor of Classical Studies Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey, and as she grabbed it from her room, she said, "You can totally borrow it for however long you need." But she urged me to note the uniqueness of the translation, as she added that this copy was interpreted by Emily Wilson, and it's been coined as a feminist interpretation. In 2017, after about 60 English translations, Professor Emily Wilson became the first woman to translate the Odyssey into English. As a female, she exposed and challenged patriarchal values and gender norms that are rooted within the ancient text, considering the deep power of words that can change a narrative. She also took care to maintain the integrity of the piece by avoiding the new incorporation of contemporary issues of sexism. While striking a balance between her female identity in this ancient piece of literature and a piece published by The Guardian, Wilson wrote, "Female translators often stand at a critical distance when approaching authors who are not only male, but also deeply embedded in a canon that has for many centuries been imagined as belonging to men." Wilson embodies the contemporary push to redefine the identity of classics by reframing the ancient narrative in the Odyssey to make the field more inclusive for scholars and readers. She forces us to reconsider a foundational aspect of classics, not only within one of the most famous texts of the classics curriculum, but also as we move forward, reading and translating literature within the canon. The fight to defend history against exploitation is an issue rooted within the field of classics, but it extends to expose societal issues. When I asked Associate Professor of Classics Andromachy Karenika about the problematic nature of classics, she wrote back, "Some of the problems that classics has been facing within recent years are at its core systemic issues within U.S. academia that extend past Latin and Greek classrooms to address racism, classism, elitism, sexism within our communities. The motion to redefine the identity of classics has spearheaded a fight that goes far beyond the discipline. Within our educational systems, other authors have taken steps to exercise their influence on modernizing America's classics. In my school's sophomore grade-wide read, Homefire by Camilla Shamsi, as an epigraph, she displayed a quote from Sophocles' play Antigone. Quote, "The ones we love are enemies of the state." Sophocles. In Homefire, Shamsi pulls on an exploration of identity, engaging young readers on a journey from America to Britain to Pakistan, while bringing in recent history and news through a modern version of Antigone and the rise of ISIS. In a book that I read last fall, Toni Morrison's book Home, on the back, Morrison deliberately compares Frank to Homer's ancient story of the Odyssey. Frank is a modern Odysseus returning to a 1950s America mined with lethal pitfalls for an unwary black man. Morrison takes on a more recent memory of the 1950s with her main character Frank, a young black veteran recently home from the Korean War. She pulls on our connection to our collective American history and identity to bring a story from the classics into a modern age. These two authors incorporate stories from the ancient world, making the foundational ideals of classics more tangible and real for the 21st century. And they truly encompass the ancient world by bringing to life America's classics in non-traditional settings and characters. In the end, a balance must be struck to recognize how ancient cultures and languages contribute to society, but also acknowledge how they reinforce some of contemporary society's more harmful tendencies. Questioning ancient values reshapes the classics' identity by helping confront elitism and making a predominantly white male field more inclusive. In many cases, re-examining the classics with a wider lens sheds light on the structural biases that create inequalities within the field. If the classics are to survive, fresh interpretations must be welcomed. To properly carry on the ancient tradition of language and society, diversity encourages people to question their biases when considering the study of the ancient world in modern times. Without fresh eyes, we teach these texts in our classroom the same way we've been teaching for centuries, reinforcing certain identity values, patriarchy, racial differences, and sexism, not only within the ancient record of history, but also within our own culture in the present. As a female Asian American, my experience exploring Latin and Greek has taught me that if you don't fit the narrative of whom classics has been built and taught to cater to, you lose part of your own identity by conforming to what classics reinforces. Classics, as a selective field, chooses to reinforce certain identity values. Emily Wilson's awareness to acknowledge the distance she feels as a female translator in a field dominated by male authors, translators, readers, and learners struck me as I considered my own classics journey. I carry that sentence with me every time I read classical literature. If we don't acknowledge the problematic nature of classics, we risk losing the field, as seen in the Capitol riots and weaponizing the field, leading to a language and culture that will truly become dead and unusable. Not only will we lose an entire discipline, but we lose the momentum from the motion of redefining the classics identity, as modernizing America's classics goes far beyond the discipline and aids us in addressing further issues within contemporary society.
As we go through our lives, we are helped by others, and we help others. And the ratio of that helping is very important. It's very important for society as a whole. Oliver Sacks, in his book Gratitude, states as he was nearing his death that he was grateful for the people who had helped them, but he was also grateful for the people who had allowed him to help them. I was in the Army in 1968, and the Army sent me to Vietnam. I was assigned to the 93rd EVAC. Also, I was a liaison between the 93rd EVAC and the medevac attachment. These are the helicopters that went to pick up the wounded and the people who were injured in battle. They were transported to our hospital, and we had to divide them into three groups. The first group, American servicemen, and we treated them in our hospital. The second were the Vietnamese servicemen, and we sent them to Saigon. And the Vietnamese civilians were destined to go to another hospital. As luck would have it, I treated the commander of forces at Dak To. The two commanding generals of all the Allied forces in Vietnam came to visit him every day, and I had to stand there because I was his doctor. I thought, how can I get something out of this? I had gone over to that other hospital where the Vietnamese civilians were supposed to be sent, and it was not satisfactory. So I asked those two generals if I could treat the Vietnamese civilians in our hospital. There was a lot of meetings, and I was given a whole Quonset hut to treat the Vietnamese. I am very grateful to all the people who helped. The nurses scrubbed and circulated in surgery because we had to do everything to help these people. We had to put implants in or whatever it took to stabilize the fractures. Nurses helped on the ward. Anesthesia helped. The Viet Cong must have heard about this because they quit hitting our hospital with rockets. There was a 10-year-old boy that came in with napalm burns over his leg. He couldn't bend his knee, and he was stuck at about 45 degrees. So I took an x-ray to be sure that he didn't have a fracture. There was no fracture. And I told him that we would have to manipulate his knee, which means bend it as far as it would go and then push on it, and it would hurt. And I told him I would stop when he told me to stop. So we worked on this, and about 3 months later, he had full motion of his knee and he could walk well. The Vietnamese have a jungle telegraph. That means that the civilians can pass word about something along the communication lines. So we sent word to his parents that he was ready to go home. The father came after a long bus ride and picked him up, and it was a joyful reunion of father and son. The father gave me a mango. His thumbprint was in it because he had ridden the bus a long way. And I looked at that mango, and I looked at that father and son walk away, and I thought, this is the greatest gift I've ever received. I then started working in an orphanage that treated disabled children. My wife was a pediatrician, and she was also a developmental pediatrician, which means she took care of disabled children. These were North Vietnamese nuns who ran this orphanage, and they were a joy to work with. One day, they came to tell me that the VC had come in the back, and they were looking for me. I went out the front and returned in 2 days to thank the nuns. They were not there. I have never been so dejected in my entire life. After my service in Vietnam, I came home. I was still in the Army, and I asked the Army if I could go back and take care of civilians. The Army said no, but I could go to Indonesia. So I went to Jakarta and gave lectures about fracture treatment for 5 years. I went for a month every year for 5 years. I then went to visit one of the surgeons in Sumatra. And as we were making rounds, we came upon the man in the bed. This man had been there for 3 years. He was very dejected. His family had quit coming to see him because they couldn't afford the small hospital charges. He had a fracture of his femur, which orthopedic surgeons know how to take care of. I asked the surgeon, why didn't you operate on him and take care of his femur? The surgeon said, he can't afford an implant. And I realized at the time that I had wasted 1 month out of every year for 5 years. I thought about this, and we knew we had to do the innovation in the environment that they had available. They did not have X-ray in the operating room. We have X-rays called C-arms here, which give instant images. They didn't have electricity because they had power surges. So we worked on butcher bones to find a way to place the screws through the slots of the nail, through the bone. This had to be done, as I mentioned, without X-ray. So we developed a system of slot finders. When these go into the slot of the nail, you can see I turn and it stops. And we know that's the interlocking hole in the nail. So therefore, we place a screw through it to hold it. This is done very frequently, and the result is a nail called an IM nail with screws going through the slots of the nail, which is a very stable fixation. That was 25 years ago, and that was the beginning of Sign. Sign is now in 57 countries. We've done 410,000 cases now, just the poor around the world. We have a database which they report to get replacements, so we send the proper sizes. But this also gives us a good accounting for our implants. And it gives us ideas that we should follow to improve our implants and make new implants. So this is a story of helping people and being helped by people. And we all have a similar story in our life. Thank you.
I'm a scientist in the field of biochemistry, and I just wish I could talk shop with a farmer ant, because biochemists such as myself, we study chemical reactions in living organisms, and some ants are pros at cultivating beneficial chemical reactions. Now, I'm passionate about studying microbial chemical reactions. So microscopic organisms or microbes such as fungi and bacteria, they perform amazing tasks in nature. And if we understand these tasks on a detailed level, we can harness their power to produce biofuels, to produce bioproducts, even to produce therapeutics for human diseases. Learning from nature to leverage sustainable products is smart for our future. And humans have a long history of harnessing the power of microbes. An excellent and famous example of this is the production of penicillin from mold. So to discuss this, we're going to go back in time. We're going to go back in time to 1928. Dr. Alexander Fleming, he left on vacation, and when he returned, he found mold growing on his petri dish of Staphylococcus bacteria. He noticed that the mold seemed to be actually preventing the bacteria around it from growing. He wanted to know more, so he dug into the details, and he found that mold was actually producing a self-defense chemical that could kill the bacteria. And this chemical is very well known to all of us today, since it's penicillin. So let's go back to present day now. So why are biochemists like myself, why are we excited about studying microbial chemical reactions now? Well, the reason is I think we're in a golden age of biochemistry. And what I mean by that is we now have the tools, we've developed the tools that we need to truly understand these complex microbial ecosystems on a molecular level. So we can get to see exactly how the activities, like the one we just talked about, how mold self-defense chemicals are being created. We can see how they occur in diverse natural ecosystems. So we can recreate these reactions and the beneficial chemicals in a lab setting. We can use them to benefit us. So my research tool of choice is mass spectrometry. And the molecules I study are enzymes and metabolites. Enzymes are protein molecules that catalyze chemical reactions in living organisms. They regulate that rate at which the chemical reaction proceeds to produce that important chemical or metabolite. And my research, it aims to understand and regulate enzymatic production of metabolites for bio-related products we want for our future. So can you imagine a future where your car is plant-powered? Those are the goals we have. That's what we want to get to. And the development of bio-based fuels, bio-based materials, bio-based chemicals, they can lead us to a strong bioeconomy while also simultaneously reducing our dependence on fossil fuels. So the concept of a bioeconomy is a good thing. It means creating renewable biological resources and converting them into value-added products and bioenergy. So we're learning from nature. It's showing us how to take a renewable resource like plant material and transforming it into useful bio-based compounds that can help us in our everyday lives. So here I've brought up a picture. This picture is one of my favorite microbial systems I study, and my goal is to figure out how enzymes in the system are transforming plants into biofuels and also bioproducts. So what's one of the first things you notice about this picture? For me, it's the complexity. So visually, this microbial system is complex. And on the molecular level, it's even more complex. So what is this system? Well, this system is the leafcutter ant fungal garden ecosystem, which is a naturally evolved multi-member system that is very, very efficient at breaking down plant material. So here's where I can talk shop with the farmer ant. I can ask that ant, how does this microbial ecosystem break down plant material at the molecular level so efficiently? But there are analysis challenges to answer this question, as you can imagine from this picture and the inherent complexity. So complex microbial ecosystems, such as the fungal garden, they contain microhabitats with different species, different resources, different activities. And if we use bulk or more traditional measurements like bulk enzyme and metabolite measurements to characterize these gardens, this would average molecules from ants, from plants, from diverse bacterial and fungal species. This averaging, it's bad because it creates noise in our analysis and it dilutes the reactions of interest, often making them undetectable. So we need to do better. And we need to analyze complex environmental ecosystems like the leafcutter ant fungal garden on a very fine detail. We know those fine detail interactions. So that's what we built. We developed a novel mass spectrometry imaging tool to map and understand chemical reactions in complex ecosystems at a microscale level. But before I get into those details on all the things we saw from our microscale analyses, let's dig into this fascinating microbial system a little more. So leafcutter ants, they are dominant herbivores that can consume as much as 17% of leaf material produced in neotropic ecosystems. So what's a neotropic ecosystem? Well, it's like the rainforest. So I want each of you to picture what you think the rainforest looks like in your mind. And I want you to picture all that lush, green, leafy material you would expect to be there. So this microbial system, it can degrade up to 17% of all that leafy biomass that you're imagining right now. That's a lot. So we want to understand how it does it on a molecular level. And let's picture one more other thing. What do you think of when you think of leafcutter ants? I bet you're thinking maybe back to a National Geographic magazine picture or maybe a Discovery Channel documentary where you have these leafcutter ants and they're carrying these huge, large pieces of leaves and they're marching across the rainforest floor. Now, these ants that you're picturing right now, they do not eat the leaves. Instead, they use the leaves to grow a fungal garden, as you saw earlier. So they're little farmers. Now, This fungal garden acts as the ant colony's food source. And maybe the name fungal garden is a little misleading because it's not just fungus. It has fungus, but it also has a resonant bacterial community. And the fungus and the bacteria, they work together for efficient degradation of plant biomass in the system. Now I want to discuss the fungal garden in a little more detail. So now we're going to look at a cartoon. So if you think of the fungal garden, it's about the size of a softball. Leaf material is placed on the top of the garden, and it's degraded as it moves through the garden over about a 4 to 6 week time period. So plant material in the top, middle, and bottom of the garden is at initial, intermediate, and advanced stages of degradation. Therefore, the microbial community dynamics of the leafcutter ant fungal garden system, they're a challenge to assess, because the high heterogeneity of species composition and activities that are changing across space and across time. So this is a perfect example of symbiosis. This high heterogeneity is actually essential for efficient plant deconstruction. So if the fungus and the bacteria, if they're separated from each other, you no longer get efficient plant deconstruction. You need both. So over 50 million years, this symbiotic system has evolved into a textbook case of mutualistic symbiosis, where all species involved both benefit and are needed for this important interaction. Now, our new mass spectrometry imaging tools, they allow us to both map and understand chemical reactions in complex systems at a microscale level by analyzing 12 micron thick sections. So that's what we're doing here. We're analyzing 12 micron thick sections of the fungal garden. Now 12 microns thick, that's not thick, that's thin. 12 microns is about the thickness of plastic cling wrap. So we're getting unprecedented molecular detail with our microscale analyses. Now remember, what are we interested in? We're interested in chemical reactions in the fungal garden. We want to see and find valuable compounds or metabolites made from plants and the precise and exact fungal and bacterial enzymes responsible for making them. And plant cell walls, they're actually quite complex. So if you think of plant cell walls, they're made up of hard to digest polymers. You have sugar polymers making up hemicellulose and cellulose, and then you also have aromatic polymers making up lignin. So we are on the hunt for microscale hotspots or activity regions which contain metabolites indicative of digestion of both these sugar and aromatic plant polymers. Our technology, it scans across the sections of the fungal garden ecosystem using a high-powered laser. The sections are coated with laser energy absorbing matrix so the ions can be identified, they can be quantified, they can be mapped in these metabolite imaging mass spectrometry experiments. Then we know the areas we're interested in, so we can perform a deep dive on the proteins in these microscale hotspots or activity regions to see what enzymes in these regions, what ones are there, and also who is making them. So the specific fungal and bacterial species making the enzymes. And what did we find? Well, the short answer is many detailed chemical reactions in the fungal garden, many that we're very interested in. And most importantly, we could clearly see that in this multi-member system, there was one clear winner who was degrading the plant polymers, and it's the fungus. Fungus is the dominant degrader of these plant polymers. So you might be thinking, well, both the fungus and the bacteria are needed. So is the fungus degrading the plant polymers? Why does it need the bacteria in the garden for efficient degradation? Well, what we learned with this analysis is the bacterial enzymes, they're participating mainly in energy and metabolism pathways, where the resonant bacteria can transform those previously digested plant polymers and make them into metabolites that are important, such as vitamins and amino acids, which benefit the bacteria, of course, but they also benefit the entire ecosystem by accelerating the fungal growth, thereby also accelerating plant mass degradation. So our mapping at the molecular level, it gave us a front row seat to see how the community in the fungal garden ecosystem is really working together, that symbiosis. And if the farmer ant could speak to us now, he might say, it's the community that matters the most. Now, to summarize our points that we saw, we could see specific species and interactions and functions occurring for this efficient plant deconstruction and bioproduct production in this ecosystem. On a detailed level, we could see that the fungus is breaking down the plant components, such as cellulose and hemicellulose, into high-energy sugars, and lignin into small aromatic compounds. Then the bacteria can further metabolize these breakdown products and other useful byproducts. So we're taking a page from this community playbook, and maybe these breakdown products and compounds synthesized by the fungus and bacteria, they could replace commonly used petroleum-based molecular building blocks to make biofuels and to make less toxic paints and adhesives. So we're learning from nature. We now have molecular level insights on how nature takes a renewable resource like plant material and transforms it into useful bio-based compounds that can improve our everyday lives. And I think we should all make it a priority to both conserve and study nature. There are so many fascinating processes just waiting to be discovered, and short of talking shop with that leafcutter ant, we now have the tools, we've developed the tools necessary to provide molecular level insights that nature has to share in our future. And I'm okay with the idea that our future might just include more fungus among us. Thank you everyone for attending my talk.
I am a wife, a mother, a healer, an author of 7 books. I am a dreamer, a self-styled philosopher, a poet for all seasons. I'm also a giver and a believer that in spite of obstacles and barriers, we can overcome odds. If the cause is right, and only if we believe in ourselves and in our God. We may not always attain our objectives in our own time frame, but we'll get there and reap its rewards more than we envisioned and even more than we ever aspired for. I also have realized that serendipity, others call it providential, always played a role for me. These were my thoughts when I first immigrated to America in 1963 at the age of 26 to pursue my medical specialty training. It was at the time, at the height of the Vietnam War, when American doctors were in the battlefields and this country opened its borders to foreign doctors who met the requisites, and I was one of them. This was also my mindset when I arrived in the Tri-Cities 7 years later as the first female ethnic board certified OB-GYN in an all-white male-dominated enclave in Washington State. But let me elucidate from the beginning. I am Enriqueta Mayuga, born to Joaquin Cartagena, a doctor pharmacist, and Rosario Vendeville, a pharmacist educator. In 1930, my parents signed a contract with the Philippine government to spearhead the preventive medicine and hygiene aspects in the northernmost town of Cagayan. There were no national highways between Manila and Cagayan at the time. Today, it takes 15 to 18 hours by land to make the trip. So they boarded a ship sailing the dangerous China Sea over 1 month for a 1,000 kilometers through rough weather and tumultuous waves. They were badly shaken and wondered whether they made the right decision. The Philippines was discovered by Ferdinand Magellan under the flagship of Spain. He is given the credit as the first man to circumnavigate the world, even though his crew continued the voyage as he was killed in the Philippines. The Philippines, with more than 7,000 islands, was a colony of Spain for over 350 years and was ruled with an iron fist, making sure that the Filipinos could barely read and write. Ignorance and their divide and conquer schema was their weapon. Finally, in the late 19th century, with the execution of the Philippine foremost national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal, the Philippines declared independence over the archipelago, but still unable to wipe out the Spanish stronghold in Manila. Admiral Dewey of the American Navy, while stationed in Hong Kong, pledged to help root out the remaining Spanish resistance, following consultation with the White House. But this was followed by a betrayal at the Treaty of Paris, when Spain refused to meet with representatives of the revolutionary government. Spain then sold the Philippines for $20 million to America. Truly, it was a stab in the back. The final result was the bloody Filipino-American War, which went on for 2 to 3 years and was met with severe disdain also by sectors of the American public. In the end, the Philippines became a Commonwealth, with America promising independence. As a child of war, I was unaware that our island paradise was under siege by the Japanese. I only sensed by the tears of my mother that something was wrong. It was December 8, 1941. December 7, 1941, with American time, when the world was shocked by the Japanese incursion at Pearl Harbor. That very day, Japan also bombed Manila with merciless fury. All that remained were orphans, widows, and rubble. Historians cited Manila as the second most devastated city in World War II. Subsequently, weeks after that, the Japanese dispersed their soldiers in many towns in the Philippines, including my town, Ballesteros. As the soldiers arrived, many of the inhabitants were able to flee in the mountains, including 8 of my family. That left my cousin and my parents among few other families that were unable to escape. My father and I were forced to remain in our home so the soldiers would have access to medical care through my father. A few weeks later, I vividly remember one early morning being ordered by the Japanese soldiers to congregate in the town plaza for an important event. My mother assured me that my cousin and I, if we comply with their demands, will not be harmed. As the American flag was brought down, replaced by the flag of the rising sun, I observed teary-eyed people. I wept along with them. The Japanese officer started speaking with such a commanding voice that it scared me. But the people still clapped on cue, so I clapped as hard as I could. My cousin quietly chided me to quit, and so I did. Years later, I realized that we were acting like robots, since nobody really understood the Japanese language. My parents took great care to shield me, then a 4-year-old, from the atrocities of the war that laid before my eyes. I saw people being led for beheadings and waterboarding, or prisoners left standing for hours. But nobody ever commented. They excoriated in the hot summer sun. Our parents probably figured that if we don't know, it won't hurt. At the time, the Japanese promoted the facades that all was normal and there was no need to fear. Only years later, long after the war, was I emotionally impacted. And up to this very day, when I remember these incidents, I would quietly cry. I arrived in America in 1963 with no qualms. So joyous in seeing utopia. By this time, everybody was mesmerized with all the good that was America. It turned out to be very emotionally difficult years for me. The black-white divide was at its peak. I read in the papers about lynching, dogs being used to disperse the crowd, people on strike, and riots in the South. At times, I was so affected that I could not concentrate on my training. From far away, my mother advised me to just be focused and reminded me about the Philippines' oppression by so many nations, but especially by 3 different nations, 350 years of Spanish rule, a horrific 4 years with Japanese, and a much more benign American occupation of 40 years. She said that I could not correct the situation and I just should concentrate on my specialty training. After all, America did not specifically seek me. I chose to come. She told me that there will always be evil and injustice in this earthly life. We should choose our forum and must be pragmatic, but never lose faith. It was emotionally difficult for me, who vowed back then, even as when I was young, that my first goal was to alleviate the sufferings and pains of humanity as a leader, rather than as a healer. I had to face reality even as I had rejection after rejection in my professional life. I turned to writing and it empowered me. I chronicled my observations and thoughts. I gained more confidence as I delved further into spirituality. I completed my 7-year medical training with aplomb, arriving in Tri-Cities with a sense of panache. It was a big leap forward mentally for me, and I felt I was at the helm, no longer reduced to scut work or being referred to as an alien, interloper, or outsider. Having been in various states, I learned the majority of the people were kind and welcoming once they know you, and especially if you know how to cook. But sometimes when you feel low, hungry, or penniless, it's easy to indulge in self-pity. I actually did not want to come to Washington State in the beginning, but my husband and I realized too late that we didn't have enough to afford our transportation even by ship. We felt that Washington, Oregon, and California were nearest to the Philippines, at least geographically. 10 years in my practice, I thought I had already proven my case. I served my clientele with passion. From my vantage as an Asian, a woman, a politician's child, a mover, an advocate, and a pioneering physician, I didn't anticipate any more glitches. Then one day in 1980, I received warning that my office and my house were wired with explosives that can go off anytime if I didn't pay the price. I was shocked, stunned, dismayed. You see, in my mind, I thought I already belonged. I thought I was in, that I had been accepted and the worst of my troubles were behind me. The FBI came and determined it was indeed a true threat. Though it was mollifying to my sensitivity, and it reassured my soul when I learned it was not from a hate group. 4 years later, the case was eventually resolved. This incident brought back memories of the Japanese occupation and the indelible mark it left on me, and cruelty in everything. It deepened my faith in the celestial. And as I look back, I realized that if you live long enough, like 85 years for me and 93 years for my spouse, no matter what, there will always be glitches, sometimes horror. But for every downside, there will be upsides. I say, All men should have inventories of their personal lives, of what we set out to do and what we actually accomplish. An account of goodwill and values retained as well habits to let go, virtues upheld and vices overcome. Of dreams and loves and joy withheld, courage and peace that were lost but were finally regained. Some of us may have maxi dreams that did not pan out. Others may have mini goals that have sprouted and grown. Events that have impacted us and defined us, as well as people have saved us, paved the way for us who gave more than we credit them for. We all had fancies of our youth that are no longer relevant in our later life, but we also have peace and the wisdom of the ages. In short, we morph, but as long as we persevere, continue our altruism, nothing should really hurt. In closing, let me quote a few lines from a poetry book written decades ago, titled, "America is not for all." Why did they think life is good? America is not for all. It's not for the bleeding heart, the meek, the imperfect, the old, the impaired, or the onion skinned. It is a double-edged sword, a dichotomy, a paradise to so many, but a hell to some. And compared this with one of my recent poems, I chose America. In the end, a country is my country when it opens its vistas. A home is my home, where I'm nurtured and welcome. And for those who believe in America, work hard, persevere, and bore the yoke of uncertainty, I say, be a pillar, be a comet, rectify the iniquities, be a torch for peace, for freedom, for humanity. But as for me, I chose America.